Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto the edge of an ancient continent, one that didn't just feel wild, but was wild, in ways we're only beginning to understand. You're standing on a landmass that was once part of a lost supercontinent called Sahul, where Papua New Guinea, Australia and Tasmania formed a single, vast realm. But we're not here to draw maps. You're not here to hike, camp, or explore in the usual sense. You're here to witness the first flickers of human presence in a land ruled by giants, to trace the first footprints across a shoreline that no longer exists, and to understand how people just like you, walked into what might have been the most dangerous place early humans ever set foot. This journey spans over 60,000 years, farther back than all written history, deeper than any myth. Think about it. The earliest pyramids are just 4,500 years old. The people you're about to walk alongside, they arrived more than 14 times before that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm that long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, city and local time. And now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just before dusk, feet sinking into a cool strand line of dark sand and shells. Overhead, the coastal winds stir paperbark leaves with a high, whispering hush. The tide has gone out, leaving a narrow band of glinting tide pools. Crabs dart under rock lips. A heron snaps its wings closed and becomes a statue among driftwood. To your right, a rock outcrop streaked with iron-red pigments. Faint human markings dance along its base. Chevron, lines, maybe spears. Someone's hand was here. Someone who knelt, palms red with ochre, and pressed their world into this surface. Not just art, but presence. And it's a very old presence. Evidence suggests that the first humans arrived in Sahul, the ancient supercontinent, at least 60,000 to 65,000 years ago. Some studies even propose a slightly earlier date, but most scholars agree that by 65,000 years ago, people had crossed the waters from Southeast Asia and begun settling the northern edges of this vast, strange land. But how do we know? Beneath your feet lies one of the most important tools in the archaeologist's kit. Quartz sand. It doesn't look like much, just tiny grains in the shallows. But buried quartz holds a secret. When it's last exposed to sunlight, it resets a natural clock inside. Later, when that grain is buried and isolated from light, it slowly accumulates trapped energy from the natural radiation around it. Scientists can measure that energy to determine how long the grain has been underground. This process is called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL for short. And at sites like Majid Baby in the Northern Territory, archaeologists have used single-grain OSL techniques to show that humans were present there around 65,000 years ago. It's not a guess. It's a physical glow locked inside sand, released in a lab thousands of years later. Still, researchers continue to refine the numbers. They argue over statistical models, sample contamination, even whether earlier tool layers might have shifted downward. But the consensus is clear. Humans arrived much earlier than previously thought, and they arrived prepared. You kneel near a shallow fire pit, half exposed by a recent rain. Tiny seed fragments crunch softly under your hand. Next to them lies a flat stone streaked with use wear, likely a grinding surface. A cluster of stone flakes rests nearby, sharp-edged, expertly struck from river cobbles. This wasn't just a camp. It was a classroom, a laboratory, a home. Inland, the forest begins to thin into patchy woodland. With the sea behind you, you follow a trail etched by centuries of feet. Some human, some not. Sand hardens beneath clay, and clay gives way to baked earth veined with drying roots. The landscape has changed over tens of thousands of years. When these first peoples arrived, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. Australia wasn't an island. It was part of a colossal land mass stretching to New Guinea. Rivers flowed where the Arafura Sea now lies. Mangroves thrived in places now submerged. And these early humans had crossed deep water, likely using rafts or canoes, to reach this world. The crossing itself is still debated. Was it intentional? Did they see land across the horizon, or follow birds, or drift with tides? Some researchers argue for multiple waves, others for one single momentous journey. What's agreed is that it required planning, cooperation, and knowledge of currents. These weren't accidental castaways. They were explorers. You pause beside a weathered termite mound as tall as your chest. Something scurries out from beneath. A bandicoot. Or perhaps something older. Gone now. You listen instead to the wind and the insects, and the sudden quiet when they pause together. It's here, in this stillness, that you understand something. The past isn't silent. It hums. The grinding stones, the pigment stains, the patterns in sand. They're all speaking. Just very, very softly. You pass beneath a stand of eucalyptus where the bark peels in long curls, each catching the last rays of light. Night falls gently. The stars emerge, unfamiliar in their patterns. You're in a sky your ancestors saw. A single torchlight flickers up ahead. You follow it toward a seasonal creek, now reduced to a ribbon of water and a scatter of smooth stones. Someone's left a woven bark bowl near the edge. Too perfect to be coincidence. A signpost from the past. The land grows darker, and so does your path. But you step forward, drawn by the sound of frogs in the distance. Frogs that, if you knew to look, signal a deeper presence nearby. Tonight, your journey leads toward a waterhole edge. And waiting there is a predator with teeth like steak knives and legs built for land. A crocodile who left the water behind long ago. You crouch in the shadows of paperbark trees, their trunks pale and peeling like old parchment in the dusk. All around you, the stillness of the waterhole seems peaceful, almost too peaceful. The frogs have gone quiet. Even the insects hush. There's a low tension in the air, like a held breath. Across the shallow basin, faint ripples break the mirrored surface. But they don't come from the water itself. They start at the edge, where cracked mud meets dry leaves. Something is moving, something heavy. And yet there's no splash, no telltale tail thump. Just the whisper of footfalls and the shifting of leaf litter. Then you see it. Long legs, lean and muscular, stepped into view. Far taller than you'd expect from a crocodile. Its body rides high off the ground, unlike the slinking low posture of today's saltwater crocs. Its head is broad, the snout tapered and thick, and when it turns, just slightly, you catch the gleam of its teeth. Not rounded, conical teeth like most crocodilians. No, these are sharp, serrated, curved slightly back, designed not for gripping, but for slicing. You're looking at quincana, a predator that haunted prehistoric Australia for over 1 million years. And it didn't swim silently through reeds like its modern relatives. It ran. Well, probably. Evidence suggests that quincana was a terrestrial specialist, a land crocodile unlike anything living today. It belonged to the extinct Mecosutchine group, a lineage of crocodilians found only in Australia and some Pacific islands. Unlike modern crocs, some Mecosutchines evolved to occupy more land-based niches, and quincana appears to be the most extreme example. Paleontologists base this on skull morphology and depositional context. Most quincana fossils are found in open plain or dry streambed settings, not aquatic habitats. Its xiphidont teeth, meaning blade-like and serrated, resemble those of carnivorous dinosaurs, not fish-eaters or scavengers. This style of dentition is rare among crocodiliforms and implies active hunting, perhaps on larger prey. But the rest of its skeleton? That's where things get murky. Unlike its teeth and skull, quincana's limbs are poorly preserved. Most reconstructions of long legs and upright posture are based on fragmentary bones, inferred from what little postcranial material exists and comparisons with other Mecosutchines. Some researchers have proposed that it walked high on its limbs, raising its belly clear of the ground, more like a monitor lizard than a crocodile. Others caution that this is speculative. Scholars still debate whether quincana was truly cursorial, that is, adapted for running, or simply better suited to moving on land than its aquatic cousins. The fossil record hasn't offered a complete skeleton yet, and until it does, we work with clues, not certainties. What we do know is this: its head alone, preserved in limestone and sediment, tells a clear story. Quincana wasn't built to grapple and drown. It was built to slice. Its teeth, xiphidont, compressed laterally, heavily serrated, were made for puncturing flesh and sawing through muscle. With jaws capable of swift snapping motion, it likely delivered devastating bites before retreating to let its prey collapse. Some reconstructions show the animal reaching lengths of 3 meters, around 10 feet, though fragmentary remains suggest the possibility of rare individuals growing up to 5 or even 6 meters. That upper estimate, though, it's hotly contested. Evidence suggests most known specimens fall well below that size, and scaling based on fragmentary remains can be misleading. Still, even at 3 to 4 meters, quincana would have been a formidable ambush predator, fast, silent, and perfectly capable of tackling medium to large prey. You watch as it moves along the far edge of the basin, dark form rippling through shadow. The long legs, if they are long, carry it quickly, without the slither or slide of its swimming kin. It pauses at the water's edge, tongue flicking slightly, nostrils flaring. Then it steps away from the water. This is no swimmer coming to drink. This is a land hunter surveying its terrain. And yet, we can't say it never swam. Some fossil sites suggest it lived near water. Some even propose it had amphibious habits, like a modern croc that also hunted on land. Researchers still argue how much time it spent in each realm. Perhaps it wasn't bound to either world. Perhaps it drifted between both, hunting where the opportunity was greatest. Nearby, you spot the twisted remains of a skeleton. Rib fragments, scattered vertebrae, a femur bearing parallel grooves, too large for small scavengers, too neat to be haphazard weathering. These may be feeding traces, or not. Scientists often hesitate to claim bite marks without exact matches. Still, the spacing feels familiar. This predator ruled parts of eastern Australia for millennia. Fossils have been found in Queensland and New South Wales, especially around the Darling Downs and Riversley fossil beds. These sites, with their karst systems and floodplain deposits, preserve not just bones, but environments, letting researchers place quincana among its prey. And those prey weren't always small. Fossil assemblages from these regions include early kangaroos, wombat-like marsupials, and other herbivores ranging from 10 to 200 kilograms. Some scholars argue quincana likely took down larger prey than itself, using surprise and a vicious first bite to disable and disorient. You shift your weight slightly, and a twig snaps under your foot. The predator halts. It doesn't look directly at you. It doesn't need to. The air has changed. The silence has returned. Then, slowly, like a ghost, the quincana recedes into the underbrush. Not with a splash, but with a rustle. Gone. You exhale, quietly. The frogs begin again. Somewhere nearby, a bird makes a short, piping call. Above you, stars have begun to emerge, pinpricks against the deepening indigo of twilight. The waterhole glimmers silver in the dark. But you step back from it now. You've seen enough. Back through the paper box, you find a dry creek bed lined with polished river stones. You follow it inland toward open woodland. Your steps are slower now, calmer, but the sense of presence remains. Tonight is far from over. And the next creature? It doesn't lurk in water or skulk in shadow. It walks proud and upright, long tail sweeping, scales glinting under moonlight. A lizard larger than any alive today. One that may have ruled the land, not just hunted in it. The dry creek bed winds upward into open woodland, each step crunching lightly on sun-baked soil, scattered with eucalyptus leaves and seed pods. Tall trees stretch overhead, their silver limbs swaying gently in the night breeze. Moonlight pours in soft columns through the canopy, painting shifting stripes across the earth. There's something oddly calming about the terrain here. Wide, open, gently sloping. But your ears catch something new. Not a growl, not a splash. Just the faint, rhythmic impact of footsteps on hardened dirt. Slow, heavy, deliberate. You freeze beside a low sandstone boulder and wait. Through the scrub ahead, a shape begins to form. Long tail, thick limbs, arched back, and towering above the brush. A head that moves like it owns the ground beneath it. The silhouette passes through a clearing and into view. A lizard, but not the kind you'd recognize from garden fences or forest logs. This one stands tall, its shoulders high, its tongue flicking slowly in and out of its mouth, tasting the air. You're staring at Varanus priscus, the largest known terrestrial lizard to have ever lived. Most people still call it Megalania, the name it once held. The great roamer, and roam it did. Evidence suggests Varanus priscus could reach lengths of 4.5 to possibly 5.5 meters in reliable estimates, longer than a modern Komodo dragon with a more robust build. Some fragmentary bones have inspired size projections of up to 7 or even 8 meters, though these are debated. What's agreed is that this creature was massive, a predator built for power and endurance. It stalks across the landscape with a rolling, muscular gait. Its claws dig into the dirt with each step, long and curved, capable of tearing through skin and bark alike. Its skin is rough, scaled, patterned in dark and lighter patches that help it blend with shadow and stone. The head swings slightly as it moves. The jaw is heavy, the teeth curved and blade-like, designed to grip and slice. But it's not just the teeth that demand respect. There's something else, something invisible. Modern monitor lizards, like the Komodo dragon, possess specialized oral glands that secrete a mix of bioactive proteins. These can reduce blood pressure, prevent clotting, and induce shock in prey animals. In 2009, researchers proposed that this system might qualify as a venom delivery mechanism, at least functionally, if not anatomically identical to venomous snakes. And Varanus priscus, its lineage places it squarely within this family. Evidence suggests it may have shared similar biochemical weaponry, though without soft tissue, we can't confirm it directly. Still, paleontologists use its close relationship with Komodo dragons and other varanids as a proxy. It's likely that Varanus priscus employed both trauma and toxin, inflicting deep wounds, then letting biology finish the job. Scholars still argue the extent to which venom contributed to kills, or if mechanical trauma alone was sufficient. Some believe the lizard's sheer size and power made venom unnecessary. Others suggest that even a mild anticoagulant effect would have tilted the odds heavily in its favour, especially in Australia's dry interior, where open wounds and delayed healing could be fatal. You watch as it halts near a cluster of termite mounds. It raises its head, nostrils flaring, tongue flicking again. The tail drags behind, leaving a deep groove in the dust. One forelimb claws gently at a fallen log, testing, probing, sniffing. Then it lowers itself to the ground with surprising grace, belly close to the earth, as if preparing to wait or pounce. This was a top predator in its time. Fossil finds from the Darling Downs and the Nullarbor suggest it shared habitats with giant wombat relatives, large kangaroos, and other megafauna. It may have stalked corridors between waterholes, ambushed at shade lines, or simply roamed in search of carrion or opportunity. Its locomotion wasn't swift, but it didn't need to be. A short burst of power, a crushing bite, and then silence. Some reconstructions, perhaps overly dramatic, show Megalania hunting early humans. While no direct evidence of such encounters exists, evidence suggests the two coexisted for a time. And given its sheer size and strength, a close meeting would not have ended well for the person involved. Modern Komodo dragons can track wounded animals for days. Varanus priscus may have done the same. A single bite, followed by retreat. The prey, bleeding and weakening, collapses hours or days later. Then the lizard returns. There is no need to chase when the world itself slows your prey. You rise carefully, heart still. The lizard shifts again, this time toward a clearing where the moonlight spills clean across the ground. You see the glint of its eye, a moment of connection, or simple coincidence. Then it turns, not to flee, simply to continue. Its back recedes into the undergrowth, tail swinging like a heavy metronome. And suddenly, the air feels lighter, not safe, but quiet again. You press forward, walking slowly across the tracks it leaves behind. 4 toe marks and a long tail line in the dust. How did this animal come to be so large? What forces shaped it? The answers lie not in this moment, but in the millions of years before. in the lineage of reptiles that once ruled the Earth, in Australia's isolation, and in the evolutionary experiments that unfolded here. Unhindered. You think back to Quincana, the land croc with steak knife teeth, and realize how differently evolution can solve the same problem: how to kill efficiently on land. Quincana used slicing teeth and long limbs. Varanus priscus used venom and brute strength. Different bodies, same intent. You descend into a shallow basin where ghost gums cast long shadows across the sand. Their bark glows pale under moonlight, and every knot looks like an eye watching silently from the past. You sit for a moment beside one of the larger trees, the bark cool against your shoulder. The breeze has stilled. Even the insects seem to have paused. And then, on the edge of hearing, a sound like dry leaves shifting. A low coil brushing bark. A presence more ancient, more silent, and far more constricting than anything you've yet met. The forest has one more predator to show you. The gum trees thin as you follow a path of dry leaves and twisted roots into a cooler place, where the air shifts not just in temperature, but in tone. You feel it before you see it. A soft exhale of air that smells of minerals and time. The cave entrance isn't wide or grand. In fact, it's almost shy, partially hidden by brambles, nearly swallowed by the land around it. But it breathes. A quiet draft flows from within, whispering across your skin like a memory. You duck inside, and the hush becomes absolute. Here in the shadowed dark, Australia's past sleeps in layered silts and bones. And in this deep, time-worn stillness, something stirs. Not a shadow, not a trick, a coil. A presence stretched along the chamber wall, nearly still, except for a slow expansion of ribcage. Wanambi. The name echoes softly in your mind. Not just a genus, but a word from one of the many Aboriginal languages. A word connected to water, to life, to serpents that shaped landscapes. And here lies its fossil form, Wanambi narracortensis, a now extinct giant snake that once inhabited these southern lands. It isn't like the pythons of today. Not quite. Wanambi belonged to a now vanished family of snakes known as Madsoidae, a group that once ranged across Gondwana. These were long, powerful constrictors, but their anatomy sets them apart from modern giants. Wanambi, for instance, had a relatively rigid skull. Its jaw structure lacked the wide gape and mobile cranial joints seen in today's boas and pythons. Evidence suggests it could not swallow prey whole if the prey was too large. That's not guesswork. It comes from detailed studies of cranial morphology, preserved in remarkable detail from fossil skulls. What it could do, though, was kill. It likely used the same fundamental strategy as modern constrictors. Ambush. Coiled beside waterholes where thirsty prey came to drink, it would strike fast, throw loops, and squeeze. The goal wasn't to crush bones, but to stop the heart. Pressure so intense that blood couldn't flow to the brain. Unconsciousness in seconds. Death soon after. But here's where things get unsettling. Because of its limited gape, some researchers suggest Wanambi might have resorted to a more gruesome method for consuming larger prey. Not whole, but in pieces. There's no direct fossil evidence for this behavior, no preserved kill sites, no skeletons with chew marks. But the possibility has led to speculation. If unable to swallow large animals intact, could it have used its curved teeth and muscular coils to pull and tear? Scholars still argue whether this chunk-feeding behavior was plausible or exaggerated. Some believe it was capable of taking only modest prey. Others allow for larger targets under specific conditions. Without soft tissue preservation or clear trace fossils, the debate remains open. What isn't debated is its size. One ambi could reach lengths of up to 6 meters, as long as a large Burmese python, but with a thicker, more robust body. It was among the top reptilian predators in its time, sharing ecosystems with Quincana, Thylacoleo, and Megalania. A whole gallery of nightmares for early humans, many of whom likely encountered these animals. You scan the cave walls as you move deeper. The floor is littered with bones, some embedded in sediment, others exposed by ancient floods or the slow collapse of overhangs. Narration caves, where this snake's remains were found, are not just a fossil site. They are a time archive. For over 500,000 years, animals have fallen into these sinkholes and chambers, unable to escape. Their bodies decomposed, were buried by silts and sands, and eventually fossilized in place. Researchers use luminescence dating, OSL, and newer PIR-IRSL methods to estimate when each layer was laid down. Some fossils are further dated using electron spin resonance, ESR, or uranium series methods, especially for tooth enamel or flowstones. That's how we know Wanambi lived well into the Pleistocene, coexisting with humans, possibly hunted, possibly feared. You kneel by a fossilized snake vertebra embedded in the cave floor. It's beautifully preserved, each process and curve intact. Nearby, a cluster of small mammal bones suggests it fed here. Or perhaps the bones arrived through time, fallen through a collapse, mingled by centuries of drip and dust. You pause and listen. Somewhere above, a slow drip echoes, water filtering through limestone, a rhythm older than memory. In this cave, taphonomy, the science of how things decay and fossilize, becomes vivid. Wanambi didn't fossilize alone. Narration holds remains of over 130 vertebrate species, stacked in subtle, overlapping layers. It's not just a graveyard, it's a living data set, a fossil library. Evidence suggests that Wanambi preferred drier climates than many of its cousins. As Australia cooled and aridified through the mid to late Pleistocene, this snake may have thrived along waterholes surrounded by drying scrub and open woodland. Its extinction likely came sometime in the last 40,000 years. The exact cause remains unclear: climate, competition, habitat loss, or a combination of all three. You step deeper into the cave, torchlight flickering across flowstone walls. The air cools even more, wrapping around your shoulders like a blanket. Time feels slower here. And then you see something that stops you mid-step. A scratch on the cave wall. No, not a scratch. 4 parallel claw marks, deep and deliberate, etched into the soft limestone. Another predator used this cave. A climber. One with claws strong enough to rake stone, and a bite far more powerful than its body size would suggest. We'll meet it next. But for now, take a moment to breathe in the silence of deep time. This cave has held its breath for tens of thousands of years. It can hold a little longer. You stand before the wall. 4 deep claw marks score the limestone surface, each perfectly parallel, spaced like the tines of a wide comb. They're high, chest level or more, and slanted upward, like something was climbing, gripping, maybe dragging itself upward into the darkness. You reach out, align your fingers, and find that your whole hand fits comfortably between the grooves. Whatever made these had strength, precision, and purpose. The air shifts around you as you descend deeper into the cave. The sediment is thick here, layers of old dust and bone meal packed underfoot. In a corner where the ceiling lowers, you find the remains of a den. Scattered bones, some gnawed. Faded prints in hardened silt. A curved scratch worn into the stone floor from repeated pacing. And in your mind, a shape begins to form. Low slung but muscular, cat-like in some ways, koala-like in others. Its head is broad, its jaws built not for chewing, but for shearing. Its thumb bears a curved, retractable claw, and its eyes glow faintly in the torchlight of your imagination. This is Thylacoleo carnifex, the pouched lion, apex mammalian predator of ancient Australia. You might expect Australia's top predator to be a marsupial version of a wolf or cat, but nature doesn't repeat itself. It improvises. Thylacoleo wasn't just a substitute for lions or leopards. It was a singular, powerful predator, evolved in a world without big placental carnivores, and it was terrifyingly well adapted to that role. Evidence suggests it stood about 75 centimeters at the shoulder and measured up to 1.5 meters long, roughly the size of a large wild boar or medium leopard. But it packed the strongest bite, pound for pound, of any known mammal. Let that settle. A mid-sized Thylacoleo could bite as hard as an African lion more than twice its size. The secret lay in its uniquely structured skull, shortened to increase leverage, reinforced with dense bone, and supported by enormous jaw muscles. And the teeth? Strange, not canine fangs, but enlarged incisors and blade-like premolars, honed to lethal perfection. Together, these teeth acted like a guillotine. The incisors pierced, the premolars sheared. In some models, this cutting action could sever a spinal cord, trachea, or major artery in a single bite, killing prey in under a minute. Modern lions, by contrast, often suffocate prey over 10 to 15 minutes. But Thylacoleo wasn't done yet. Each of its forelimbs bore a semi-opposable thumb, tipped with a large retractable claw, curved like a raptor's talon. These claws weren't for grappling or climbing alone. They were killing tools, and possibly climbing aids, because evidence suggests Thylacoleo could climb. That's not just imagination. In 2016, researchers examined deep vertical scratches etched into cave walls, like the ones you saw. The spacing, shape, and orientation matched Thylacoleo's claws better than any other known animal. Some of the scratches were over 2 meters above the floor, indicating not just movement, but deliberate climbing behavior. Scholars still argue how advanced it was. Could it leap? Did it ambush from above? Was it arboreal in its youth and terrestrial in adulthood? We don't yet know, but it certainly used caves. And it definitely left its mark. You trace one of those marks now, fingers cold against the stone. Then, slowly, you step forward into the imagined world of the past. Picture this. A dry woodland clearing, moonlight silvering the leaf litter. A diprotodon calf, young but still hefty, grazes near a copse of trees. A shadow shifts above. Not a bird, not a branch. With a low rustle, a predator descends. It lands on all fours, claws extended, teeth bared, a blur of muscle and precision. The calf jerks, kicks, but it's too late. One slash to the shoulder, one bite to the neck. Then silence. Thylacoleo may have dragged its kills into trees, or into caves like this one. There's no definitive evidence of carcass caching, but the possibility remains. Some fossil accumulations hint at repeated use of certain dens. Repeated behavior, familiar paths worn by claw and paw. You kneel near a scattered pile of bones, kangaroo tibias, fragments of wallaby pelvis, and one partial skull bearing a precise puncture at the base. Not conclusive, but suggestive. The light of your torch flickers across the cave ceiling. Dust hangs in the air like memory. You imagine the breath of this animal, warm, quiet, curling into the cold like smoke. It belonged to a group of marsupials called diprotodonts, same family as koalas and wombats. And yes, its closest living relatives are gentle tree huggers and tunnel diggers. But Phylocoleo followed a different path. It turned browsing teeth into blades, climbing paws into weapons, small brain into big muscle. And it ruled. Fossils of Phylocoleo have been found across much of Australia, from Queensland to South Australia to Western Australia's limestone karsts. It survived for over 1 million years, likely disappearing only in the last 46,000 to 35,000 years. Its extinction is debated. Some argue climate change reduced prey, others point to human competition. Its denning caves may have made it vulnerable to early hunters, or perhaps it simply couldn't adapt to the rapid environmental shifts of the late Pleistocene. But here, tonight, it remains. The cave holds its breath as you move past. You leave the claw marks behind, emerging once more into open air. The stars above are as brilliant as ever. But now, the land feels older. Not just because of the bones you've seen, but because you realize how many thousands of years it held on to them. You step into low brush, the scent of eucalyptus and salt bush on the wind. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls. And there, in the pale moonlight, a great shadow moves across the plain. No predator, no claws, just weight, strength, and a skull built to crush branches. And maybe bones. We're leaving the hunters now. It's time to meet the hunted. The plains open before you like a shallow sea of golden grass, rippling gently in the moonlight. The air feels different here, thicker, almost heavy. Beneath your boots, the soil crunches with a salty crust, cracked and curling at the edges. It smells of dust, of dried algae, of drought. You've arrived at what was once Lake Callabonna, now a salt flat scabbed over by time, but tens of thousands of years ago, it was a life-giving basin. In the dry season, the lake shrank to a thick, muddy slush ringed with sedgy and thirsty animals. And in some seasons, those animals never made it back out. Tonight, as you crouch low, you feel it before you see it, a faint tremor in the crust. Then another, not sharp, like a predator's pounce. Slow, measured, rhythmic. You rise just in time to see them crest the edge of a low dune, massive forms, broad-backed and lumbering, moving in a quiet convoy. They are diprotodons, and they look like wombats stretched by myth. At first glance, they resemble prehistoric hippos, but the closer they come, the stranger they become. Each animal is easily the size of a small car. Thick legs like pillars, deep-set eyes beneath heavy brows, and a snout, broad, flat, flanked by chisel-like teeth that gnash through shrub branches with a calm, grinding motion. Diprotodon optatum is the largest known marsupial to have ever lived. Evidence suggests adult individuals commonly weighed between 2 to 2.8 tons, heavier than a modern black rhinoceros. Some estimates suggest rare giants may have neared or slightly exceeded 3 tons, but values beyond that push the bounds of available data. Still, Even the modest estimates are immense. These weren't shy herbivores. They were walking fortresses. And yet, they weren't slow. The lead female, larger, more scarred, swings her head as she walks, testing the wind. Her jaw works in a steady, circular rhythm, shredding mouthfuls of salt bush into pulp. Behind her, juveniles keep pace with surprising agility, their footfalls muffled by the powdery crust. You crouch in silence as the herd moves past. Dust trails halo their bodies like a wake behind a ship. But you're not just here to watch them walk. You're here to understand what made them possible. One answer lies in their skulls. Fossil crania show wide, reinforced arches to anchor powerful jaw muscles. But more interesting is what lives inside their molars, literally inside, when viewed in cross-section. In a 2021 study, paleontologists used finite element analysis, FEA, to simulate how diprotodon skulls handled mechanical stress during chewing. The results? Evidence suggests that at their back, molars, bite forces could reach up to 11,000 newtons, enough to snap a thick branch, or, if misused, crack a femur. But don't worry, these weren't carnivores. Their teeth were built for grinding plants, not breaking bones. Still, it tells us something about their diet and resilience. These animals had to process tough, dry vegetation, saltbush, sedges, woody stems, during periods of drought and scarcity. And their jaws were up to the challenge. FEA works by digitally reconstructing a skull in 3D, dividing it into thousands of tiny elements, and calculating how stress moves through bone during biting. This helps researchers understand evolutionary trade-offs, where strength was needed, where lightness was allowed, how different species specialized for different diets. You can picture it, the virtual skull, glowing in rainbow shades as pressure builds at the molars, then disperses along the jawbone. Science turning silent bones into moving models. But even with this power, Diprotodon was not invincible. Fossil beds at places like Lake Callabonna tell a sobering story. Here, dozens of Diprotodon skeletons lie preserved in salt-encrusted silts. Some adults, some juveniles, many trapped during dry seasons when the lake turned to mire. Their heavy weight became their enemy. Once stuck, they couldn't escape. Nearby, researchers have found evidence of infection in some remains, bone lesions, signs of osteomyelitis, possibly from injuries or malnutrition in the final years of life. Life in late Pleistocene Australia was hard, for herbivores as well as hunters. Still, the scale of this animal is awe-inspiring. As the herd moves on, you notice the landscape shifting with their weight. Shrubs bend, dust lifts, the moonlight ripples over their backs like water. And you realize, this is what the predators were watching. Quincana, Thylacoleo, even Megalania. All of them would have measured themselves against this bulk. Would they risk an attack on the young? Could they take one down at the water's edge? Was it worth the chase? Scholars still debate whether early humans hunted Diprotodon. Some Aboriginal rock art may depict large marsupials, but direct kill sites are lacking. Scattered tool marks, if they exist, are debated. But the species did survive for thousands of years after human arrival, meaning there was overlap. Whether competition, climate change, or slow ecological shifts brought their end, we don't yet know for certain. You sit quietly as the last of the herd vanishes over the ridge. The dust settles. The stars hold their breath. A sudden breeze tickles the edge of the lake bed, carrying with it the scent of char, burnt wood, ash. You follow it instinctively, just over the rise. There, Tucked in a shallow depression lies the outline of a hearth. Blackened stones, cracked white fragments scattered nearby. Eggshell, and not from any bird you know. A shadow leans across the sand, a hulking, featherless form with a beak like a battle axe. We've met the grazers. Now it's time to meet the birds that stood taller than you. You crest the rise slowly, feet sinking into wind-blown sand that whispers against your ankles. The air is drier here, tinged with the faint, unmistakable scent of ash. Ahead, in the curve of a shallow swale, a hearth lies abandoned. Not by time, though it is ancient, but by its makers, who left behind just enough to suggest a story, and just little enough to leave it incomplete. Blackened stones form a crescent. At their center, soft charcoal, collapsed in on itself like a long, cold star. Around the hearth, scattered fragments of something pale and curved. You kneel, brushing away the top layer of grit with your fingertips. Eggshell. Thick, chalky, fractured from heat. Not bird-like in the everyday sense. Not chicken. Not emu. This belonged to a giant. Genyornis newtoni, to be precise. One of the last of the dromonethids. Australia's family of extinct giant flightless birds, sometimes called thunderbirds. And though their name conjures stormy myths, their reality may have been stranger still. Genyornis stood roughly 2 meters tall, a full head above the average modern human. It weighed around 220 to 250 kilograms, roughly the mass of a large male lion, but all in bone and sinew and feathered bulk. Its skull was heavy, its beak deep and robust, almost parrot-like, but on a titanic scale. Evidence suggests it was primarily herbivorous, though its skull once led earlier researchers to wonder about omnivory. That idea has largely fallen out of favor. Its lineage, dromonethids, spanned millions of years in Australia. But Genyornis was the final act, surviving until roughly 47,000 years ago, overlapping with the first humans on the continent. And we know that not because of bones, but because of these very fragments you now hold. The shells are burned, fractured by heat in a way that natural fires rarely produce. They're spread in loose rings, consistent with cooking sites. Some show thermal gradients from hot core to cool edge. Others have protein residues, detectable through modern paleoproteomics, protein sequencing that can persist long after DNA degrades. In 2016, a major study analyzed these burnt eggshells using amino acid racemization and thermal gradients, comparing them to modern analogues. The conclusion? These shells weren't just cooked, they were deliberately cooked. And the scale, shape and microstructure of the eggs matched Genyornis better than any other known species. Evidence suggests that humans gathered and roasted these eggs, possibly for generations. A shared ritual, a reliable meal, and perhaps unknowingly, the beginning of the end for a species. But not everyone agrees. Scholars still debate the precise identity of these eggshells. Some argue they may belong to a giant extinct megapode, a large brushed turkey-like bird. Others point to the clarity of protein data, the match in shell thickness, and the widespread geographic distribution of finds in favor of Genyornis. The consensus leans heavily toward the thunderbird, but careful language still prevails. You turn one shell fragment between your fingers, watching the moonlight catch its pitted surface. The ridges feel almost like fingerprints, and in a way they are. Each shell tells us about diet, behavior, even environment. Stable isotope analysis reveals what the mother bird ate, what water she drank, and whether her landscape was dominated by dry shrubs or lush grasslands. You can almost reconstruct the bird from the shell alone. A low gust rolls across the dunes, lifting a whisper of ash from the hearth. You look up, and there, just at the edge of your vision, a figure steps across the flats. Massive, upright, feathered, it moves with a quiet, deliberate grace. Head swaying, beak pecking occasionally at low scrub. Powerful legs ending in broad feet with thick claws. Not built for tearing, but for defense. For balance, for walking endless kilometers in search of forage. Genyornis, reconstructed here in your mind, seems less monstrous than expected. Not a terror bird, not a predator, but still formidable. Its beak, though herbivorous, could crush seed pods and woody fruits with ease. Its bulk discouraged all but the boldest predators. And its nest, likely a shallow scrape in open ground, would have been fiercely defended. But not against humans. Not at first. It's easy to imagine the scene. A small group of people cresting a dune, scanning the scrub below for signs of movement. A mound of dirt. A broken eggshell. A trail of clawed footprints. And somewhere, just out of view, a nest. Maybe the bird isn't there. Maybe it fled. Maybe it stood its ground and was driven off with spears and shouts. The eggs, still warm, are lifted carefully, carried back, roasted in embers, eaten slowly, savoured. A good meal. And the next season, it happens again. And again. Slowly, quietly, a cycle unravels. Fewer eggs hatch. Fewer chicks survive. The population dips, not because of a single event, but because of thousands of tiny choices layered over generations. Genyornis disappears from the record around 47,000 years ago, one of many megafaunal species lost during that pivotal window. It may have succumbed to a combination of human pressure and climate stress. Or perhaps its reproductive strategy, honed over eons, simply couldn't adapt to this new kind of predator. You rise from the hearth, brushing sand from your hands. The shell fragments remain. The coals are cold. The bird has vanished. But the story lingers. Above you, a line of trees marks a seasonal watercourse. Dry now, but promising. You head toward it, led by instinct, and the memory of all things ancient seeking water. But at this pool, the rules change. Because someone else is already waiting. Something broad-muzzled, quiet, and older than all the rest. It doesn't need to chase. It only needs you to get close. The dry channel leads you gently downhill, its edges crumbling where past floods once chewed through clay and rock. Stray tufts of grass cling to the banks, their blades pale under the moon. You follow the subtle curves of the ancient watercourse until it widens into a still, dark pool. It shouldn't be here. This quiet, this water. And yet it is. You crouch at the edge, breath shallow. The surface reflects the stars with eerie clarity, like a portal into another sky. Crickets drone in the distance, but here everything is still. Suspiciously still. Then there. A ripple. Not large, just a soft pulse against the reeds. You lean closer, and something exhales. Slow, wet, heavy. From the far bank, just beneath the overhanging boughs of a fallen eucalypt, a pair of eyes breaks the surface. The snout behind them is wide, the nostrils flared, the scale pattern thick like cracked ceramic. The water barely stirs as the beast shifts forward, revealing a long head that tapers into a jaw built not for snapping in ambush, but for holding. This is Paludirex vincenti, once known as Palamnarchus, the so-called Swamp King. And it's no misnomer. Evidence suggests that this extinct genus of giant freshwater crocodilian reached lengths of 5 to possibly over 6 meters, making it one of the dominant aquatic predators of prehistoric Australia's rivers and wetlands. Though long mistaken for Palamnarchus, a taxonomic revision in 2020 clarified the identity of key skull specimens and renamed them Paludirex, meaning Swamp King in Latin. The creature before you is not just an old croc with a new name, it represents a lineage of semi-aquatic predators that ruled the inland waterways during the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. You remain perfectly still, and so does it. What little we know about Paludirex's behavior comes from its skull. Broad and heavy, with an unusually robust snout, it likely preyed on large vertebrates, perhaps even juvenile diprotodons or other megafauna that ventured too close to the water's edge. Unlike Quincana, which was probably more terrestrial, Paludirex was a true ambush hunter, lurking in murky shallows with patience forged by evolution. The teeth were conical and stout, designed to grip and drown, not slice. This wasn't a sprinter. It was a trap. And what a successful one. Its fossils have been found across eastern Australia, particularly in Queensland's Darling Downs and Riversley fossil beds. These ancient wetlands were teeming with life and death. Seasonal droughts would shrink pools into muddy choke points, drawing desperate animals to drink. Some never left. Scholars still debate how distinct the various Paludirex species were. The 2020 taxonomic revision helped clarify some confusion, but ongoing discoveries suggest this lineage may have included multiple closely related forms with varying skull shapes and sizes. More specimens are needed to sort the family tree. What is clear, though, is the ecological role. Dominant freshwater ambush predator. You slowly exhale. The Paludirex doesn't lunge, doesn't growl. It simply watches, unblinking, waiting. The water around it remains glassy. It doesn't need to move. That's your job. You back away slowly, heart steady, and make your way along the bank, your path illuminated by slivered moonlight on smooth stones. And yet, even as the water fades behind you, the memory of it clings. You're struck by a strange symmetry. You've seen 2 crocodilian titans now, Quincana, slicing on land, and Paludirex, drowning in silence. They weren't rivals. They ruled different realms, one for open plains and dry ambushes, the other for wetlands and still death. And they both vanished, likely around the same time, in the Pleistocene twilight. Climate change, shifting watercourses, loss of prey. It's hard to say which domino fell first. But fall they did. You climb a slight rise and pause to catch your breath. The wind has picked up, sending a soft hiss through nearby spinifex. Up ahead, under the open sky, shapes move across the plains, tall, upright, and bouncing gently. You expect kangaroos, but what you see is not quite. They walk on long, straight limbs, with their backs nearly vertical, and arms that don't swing. Heads large, eyes forward. You blink. No, not kangaroos. Something older, something stranger. Sthenurins, the short-faced kangaroos. And leading them, taller than the rest, is Procoptodon gallia, The giant kangaroo. You move forward slowly, the Paludorex forgotten for now, replaced by the odd, deliberate movements of these ancient walkers. They browse among low shrubs, methodical, quiet, bipedal. Welcome to the next encounter. But before we step forward, take one last breath of the waterhole, one last ripple of memory. The Swamp King may be gone, but in this land, water always remembers. The wind carries you forward now, away from the swampy hush of the waterhole and out onto a wide open plain. The stars above seem closer here, as if the land itself has thinned with time, offering less resistance between earth and sky. The ground underfoot crunches with old clay and salt-tolerant shrubs, interspersed with flat stones that gleam like silver under moonlight. And just ahead, across this low, undulating terrain, something moves with an unfamiliar grace. It walks upright, really walks. Not with the bounding lope of a kangaroo, but with long, measured strides, like a person balancing on stilts. Its spine stays vertical. Its legs lift and fall deliberately, feet contacting the ground heel first. At this distance, it could almost be human. Almost. But it's not. This is Procoptodon golia, the largest kangaroo to have ever lived. Evidence suggests it stood up to 2.2 meters tall, with some individuals possibly exceeding that height. Weighing in at around 200 to 250 kilograms, it was nearly as heavy as a full-grown human, but twice as tall at the shoulder and far more robust. It doesn't hop, it marches. And that's no poetic flourish. Biomechanical studies of its limb structure, especially the proportions of the femur and pelvis, indicate that Procoptodon likely couldn't hop at all. Not in the way modern kangaroos do. Its body was too heavy, its ankle joints too rigid. Instead, it appears to have walked upright, bipedally, in a gait more akin to a lumbering person than any known kangaroo today. It's unsettling to watch. Not monstrous, just unfamiliar. A creature from a world that solved problems in different ways. The animal's face is flat, with eyes set widely apart, and a deep, broad jaw, perfect for grinding tough desert vegetation. It browses calmly now, stripping pale green leaves from a low chenopod bush. Its hands, though large, lack the dexterity of human fingers, but they're surprisingly precise. You watch it break off a twig, sniff it once, then consume it slowly. Modern kangaroos balance with their long tails during locomotion. But Procoptodon's tail was even thicker, suggesting it may have acted as a third leg, helping propel the animal forward in a kind of tripedal walk, or at least stabilizing it as it stepped. In some studies, limb reconstructions and musculoskeletal modeling have been used to estimate how these animals moved. Joint mobility was constrained compared to modern kangaroos. The knee and ankle likely had limited flexion, while the hip favored vertical motion. Combined with their mass, this strongly supports the upright stride hypothesis. Scholars still debate the exact mechanics. Did they shuffle or stride? Could they hop at low speeds? Were the largest individuals completely grounded, while juveniles retained some bounce? The fossil record offers clues, but full skeletons are rare. Still, the consensus leans toward terrestrial walking for the giants. You follow quietly behind a small group, 2 adults and a juvenile, keeping to the low rise behind them. They move with purpose, but not speed. Their wide feet distribute weight efficiently, leaving shallow, oval prints in the sandy soil. They pause occasionally to browse. When one reaches for a high branch, you see the full extension of its form. Back straight, arms raised, tail steadying it from behind. For a moment, it could be a human silhouette in costume, if that costume weighed 500 pounds and chewed cud. The plains they inhabit are not lush. These are Pleistocene shrublands, dominated by drought-tolerant plants like salt bush, bluebush, and desert wattles. The climate here between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago fluctuated wildly, cooler and drier than today, with intermittent pulses of aridity that shrank lakes and fragmented habitats. And yet, these animals thrived in it. Their size helped them travel long distances between food sources. Their teeth, broad, ridged molars, were built to handle fibrous, abrasive plants. Their guts were likely massive fermentation chambers, slowly extracting energy from low-quality browse. But there was a cost. They required space, time, and stability. When human fire regimes began reshaping the landscape, deliberately or incidentally, some of those food sources may have changed. More open grasslands, fewer ctenopods, and with changing vegetation came nutritional stress. Not all at once, but enough. And humans, though perhaps not actively hunting the giant kangaroos, were now another competitor on the land. No direct kill sites have been found for Procoptodon, though a few debated associations with tools exist. Still, evidence suggests that its extinction, like so many others, occurred in a narrow band of time around 46,000 years ago, just a few thousand years after human arrival. Scholars still argue whether fire, hunting, or climate played the lead role. Most now agree it wasn't a single cause, but a combination. These animals, so finely tuned for a world of scattered shrubs and deep-rooted stillness, couldn't adapt fast enough to one that changed with lightning and smoke. You sit now beneath a clump of spindly acacias as the last of the group disappears into the night. Their movements leave behind nothing but footprints and a lingering unease. There's something uncanny about seeing a kangaroo walk like you do. It's like looking into a parallel timeline, one where different rules applied, one where ancient mammals took paths we didn't expect, and that feeling only deepens as you rise and continue across the plain. Because just ahead, half hidden in the brush, lies the scratch-marked trunk of a tree, peeled open and clawed deep. Not the work of kangaroos, not of lions, but of something stranger still, a herbivore with claws. One that didn't walk like you, or anything else. The tree stands twisted and hollow, bark shredded in long strips from its base to over 2 meters high. Not broken by wind, not weathered by time. These marks are too precise. Deep gouges spaced evenly apart, curving in on themselves like the claws of something deliberate, something strong. You approach slowly, running your fingers along one of the grooves. It's fresh-looking, though you know it's ancient. The dry air and mineral-rich soils have preserved everything here. The bones, the trees, even the violence. And then you see them. Tracks, wide, broad, with deep heel impressions and long toe drags. They move off through a ribbon of riverine woodland toward the glint of a dry creek. You follow, heart steady, steps silent, and there it is. At first it doesn't seem real. Squatting in the shadow of a low casuarina, a creature with a wide, muscular body and a face part-way between a tapir and a bear. Its fur is thick and coarse, dusty brown with faint striping along the back. Its head hangs low, sweeping side to side as it pulls leaves into its mouth with powerful forearms. But what captures your attention, what stops you entirely, is the way it moves. Its elbows don't bend like yours. They don't even bend like a wombat's. They barely bend at all. This is Palorchestes azale, often called the marsupial tapir, though its resemblance to that animal is mostly superficial. It's stranger, more mysterious, and in some ways more powerful. Evidence suggests Palorchestes reached up to 2.5 meters in length, standing close to a meter at the shoulder and weighing around 200 pounds to 250 kilograms. That's roughly the mass of a black bear, but with a completely different body plan. The most immediately unusual feature? Its forelimbs. Long and heavily muscled, the limbs ended in large hands with massive claws, 3 digits especially prominent, their tips curved and sharp. But more fascinating than their size was how they moved. They didn't. Much. Recent 3D joint reconstruction studies have shown that Palorchestes had an unusually limited range of motion at the elbow. Instead of swinging forward and back like in most mammals, its forelimb movement appears to have been more vertical, like a hydraulic press. Its elbow joint allowed only restricted flexion, meaning it likely pulled downward rather than forward. This clawing press motion is thought to have helped it strip bark, snap branches, or pull entire shrubs free of the ground. You watch as the animal does exactly that, bracing itself with one forelimb while raking down a tree with the other, peeling loose long streamers of cambium and leaf in one slow, powerful stroke. It then shuffles forward slightly, hindquarters swaying with a lazy rhythm, and repeats the motion. Its head is low-set and strange. The nasal bones are retracted, which once led paleontologists to speculate it may have had a short trunk or a large prehensile upper lip, though scholars still debate this. Some reconstructions show it with a tapir-like snout. Others leave it blunt and squared. Without soft tissue, it remains guesswork. But whatever sat at the end of that face, it was used constantly, pulling, testing, manipulating. This was a browser, not a grazer, and its body was built to work hard for every meal. Its teeth, too, were specialized, not grinding molars like a kangaroo or diprotodon, but elongated, ever-growing molars with flat surfaces well-suited to slicing tough vegetation. Their occlusal surfaces suggest heavy wear, possibly from a diet of fibrous, abrasive plants. As you watch, it turns slightly and lets out a soft, snorting exhale. Its breath fogs faintly in the cool air. The ears twitch, but the body remains calm, unthreatened. No predators here. Not anymore. Palorchestes lived throughout the Pleistocene and likely disappeared around 40,000 years ago, during the same extinction wave that swept away Diprotodon, Phylacoleo, and others. Fossils have been found in eastern and southeastern Australia, often in riverbeds or floodplain silts. Its bones are rare, more fragile than other megafauna, and more easily lost to erosion. But when they're found, they tell a consistent story. Big, strong, slow, purposeful. Its extinction, like so many of its peers, likely involved a combination of changing climate, vegetation loss, and human impact. There is no direct evidence of hunting, no butchered bones, no spear points. But humans altered landscapes with fire, and fire reshapes forests. And forests, once gone, are slow to return. The animal before you lowers itself to its elbows with a grunt and begins pulling at the roots of a shrub, tearing them up with a sound like ripping cloth. Its claws churn the earth. Its shoulder muscles ripple beneath heavy fur. And again, You feel the uncanny familiarity of something almost recognizable. Not a tapir, not a bear, something entirely marsupial, but evolved in isolation long enough to seem alien. You ease backward now, careful not to disturb it. It doesn't notice, or if it does, it doesn't care. This isn't a flighty creature. It moves through the world like it belongs. Because it did. For hundreds of thousands of years, these strange herbivores reshaped their habitats just as surely as the predators influenced them. They were agents of change, quiet ones. You follow the path of clawed tracks back toward the drier ridge, where the forest begins to thin again. And just ahead, you spot a flicker of orange. Not an animal, not the setting moon. Fire, a small ancient hearth still glowing with heat. Stones blackened. Shadows long. You walk toward it, drawn not by hunger but by memory, because where there is fire, there is something else. Us. Our kind. And we have work to do. You approach slowly, the crackle of fire reaching you in small scattered snaps. Not a roaring blaze, just embers now, smouldering inside a careful ring of stones. The scent of charred wood mingles with something earthier, pulverized seeds, ash, and the faint metallic trace of ochre dust. A shape sits cross-legged at the fire's edge. Not a ghost. Not a vision. Just another person. Their hands move rhythmically, grinding something against a flat slab of sandstone with a rounded pebble. The movement is deliberate, calming. You sit opposite, and time seems to loosen. This is not a reconstruction, not an imagined reenactment. This is presence. Evidence suggests that some of the earliest ground-edged stone tools in the world come from Australia. Tools used not to pierce or cut, but to shape, to grind, to prepare food, pigment, and wood. At sites like Arnhem Land and Jawoyn Country, archaeologists have found these artifacts in stratified layers dating back over 40,000 to 50,000 years. Their surfaces bear the telltale sheen of use-wear polish, and sometimes the microscopic traces of plant residue ground into the rock itself. This person, this moment, is a window into that world. They raise the grindstone briefly to examine the paste. It's not flour, not in the modern sense, but it's food. Seed processing, breaking down tough desert grasses, cracking acacia pods, preparing what would later be mixed with water, formed into cakes, and baked among the coals. This is cooking, but also chemistry. Grinding activates enzymes, unlocks calories, softens fibers. It transforms the inedible into sustenance. And in doing so, transforms time. Hours of preparation for a few minutes of nourishment. But this fire offers more than food. Near the edge of the hearth, another stone sits, streaked in deep red. Ochre. Crushed and mixed with animal fat, water or resin, it becomes paint. Symbol. Sunscreen. Glue. It can line a burial. Trace a handprint. Mark a body for ceremony. Ochre pigments found across Australia are among the oldest known anywhere. Some date back more than 50,000 years, carried from site to site, sometimes sourced from distant quarries hundreds of kilometers away. What does this mean? It means people didn't just survive here. They belonged here. They organized, remembered, created. And they did it all while living among giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, thunderbirds, land crocodiles, and armored herbivores with clawed forelimbs, This wasn't a hostile wilderness to them. It was country. A landscape understood in terms of rhythm, story, and law. Scholars still debate exactly when certain innovations appeared. Did ground edge axes originate here independently? Were these tools used daily, or just for special tasks? What foods were prioritized? How widely did practices spread? The archaeological record is patchy, complicated by erosion, time, and the great distances between sites. But the weight of evidence is growing. And what it shows is this. People were making complex decisions about resources long before the so-called agricultural revolution. They were shaping stone, shaping diet, shaping identity. You glance again at the fire. A small slab leans across a hot coal. Something rests atop it. Thin, brown, crisping at the edge. A kind of cake, perhaps. Or roasted tuber. Its scent is faint, but warm. Nearby, a digging stick lies propped against a tree. The end is charred, on purpose. Fire-hardening tools increases their durability, a technique used for millennia. Beside it, a shell scraper and a sharp flake sit nestled in a palm-sized bowl, half filled with ochre-rich dust. This is not the scene of a desperate survivor. It is the hearth of a practiced practitioner. Someone who knows the land and lives with it. And there are others. Though invisible now, traces remain. Rock shelters with hand stencils. Fire pits layered over older ones. Seed-grinding stones smoothed by generations of use. Even the arrangement of hearthstones, some circular, others crescent-shaped, carry patterns of repetition and choice. You look up. The stars remain where they've always been. But here on the ground, a different map unfolds. Of fire, food, pigment, and place. Behind you lies a trail of vanished giants. Ahead lies the shifting edge of climate and change. But here, in this ring of warmth and slow movement, is something that outlasted them all. Human hands. Shaping the world, grain by grain. You rise slowly, brush the dust from your legs, and follow the creek bed beyond the fire. Its banks are crumbling, wind-carved. Scrubby bushes cling to pockets of soil. But every now and then you see the glint of something ancient, a flake of worked quartz, a patch of scorched clay, the outline of a seed cache long since turned to dust. The landscape is filled with echoes, not of roaring beasts, but of careful action, of memory, and the memory deepens as you move forward into the lowlands, where water no longer runs, where forests once stood, and where the clues lie buried, waiting to be read by charcoal, pollen, and stone. The ground here is deceptive. It seems empty, just a flat stretch of low, cracking clay, pocked with wind-blown shrubs and patches of dry lichen. But every few steps, you catch signs. A line of bleached charcoal buried just below the surface. A grain of pollen lodged in ancient lake-bed sediment. A fragment of shell where no sea has been for tens of thousands of years. This place is not empty, it's layered. And those layers hold the story of how Australia changed. Not all at once, but pulse by pulse, like a long, slow breath through deep time. You kneel near the edge of what was once a lake, long since dried into silt and shadow. With your hand you trace a line through the cracked earth, as if skimming a page. In a way, that's exactly what you're doing. This is a page from Australia's Paleoclimate Archive, written not in words, but in proxies. Proxies are indirect clues, records of past environments encoded in things like lake bed sediments, cave speleothems, mineral formations like stalagmites, ancient charcoal, pollen grains, and isotopes in fossil shells or teeth. Each one tells a different part of the story, but together they show patterns too big for any single clue to reveal. And here's what those proxies say. Evidence suggests that between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, Australia's climate entered a period of increasing instability. The world was cooling toward the last glacial maximum, and though Australia didn't freeze, it dried. Rainfall patterns shifted. Monsoons weakened. Inland lakes evaporated. Dune fields expanded, swallowing grasslands. Pollen records from lake cores show a shift from forest to shrubland to open desert in some regions. Speleothem isotopes, the oxygen and carbon locked into stalagmites, reflect reduced rainfall and changes in vegetation. Charcoal layers increase in frequency and concentration, signaling more fires, possibly due to human ignition, though scholars still debate the balance between natural lightning and deliberate burning. You pause by a low rock outcrop and imagine it submerged. Just a few thousand years ago, this may have been shoreline, a place where animals came to drink, where people foraged, where reeds grew thick and tall. Now it's dust. You walk further, and the ground begins to rise, gently at first, then in broad curves. These are dune systems, some of which have been dated using optically stimulated luminescence, OSL, to tens of thousands of years old. The sand grains, buried and forgotten, reveal when the dunes last migrated, when vegetation failed to hold them in place, and the wind took over. Everywhere you look, time is frozen in fragments. And yet, this is not a story of collapse. Not yet. It's a story of adaptation. The animals we've walked with, Diprotodon, Procoptodon, Palorchestes, they had survived previous climatic swings. Australia's environment had always been boom and bust, wet and dry, lush and lean. But this time was different. The proxies show not just drying, but fragmentation. Waterholes disappeared, but not all at once. Forests retreated, but unevenly. Refugia, pockets of surviving vegetation, remained in some places, while others turned to salt and stone. These patchy patterns made survival harder, especially for large herbivores with long gestation periods and limited mobility. And then came us. Humans were fire makers, landscape engineers. The spread of fire-loving plants like spinifex and fire-stimulated shrubs suggests that burning increased across the continent. Whether accidental, ritual, or tactical, these burns reshaped the mosaic of habitats, favoring some species while displacing others. Some researchers argue that fire stick farming maintained open hunting grounds. Others suggest it hastened the demise of rainforest specialists. Evidence suggests that these changes were gradual, cumulative, and deeply intertwined with human presence. But again, not everywhere. Scholars still argue the degree to which human activity, climate shifts, and ecological fragility combined to drive extinctions. The answer is not a single domino, but a pattern of tipping points, different for every species, region, and niche. You find a small overhang, half sheltered by sandstone slabs, and sit. From here you can imagine the land as it once was. A wide basin filled with shallow water, ringed by flowering shrubs, kangaroos grazing at the edge, diprotodons snorting in the shallows, thunderbirds walking slowly through the reeds. The sky would have been sharper, clearer, each star a pinhole in the black. The breeze would carry the scent of damp earth and blooming wattles. And now, dust. A hollow wind, a handful of seeds rattling in their pods. But the clues remain. Charcoal traces in soil profiles, dune cross-sections like geological fingerprints, speleothem layers glowing under ultraviolet light, radiocarbon and OSL dates like time stamps in the rock. These are the quiet instruments of deep science, soft-spoken but precise, and like the grinding stones and hearths, they speak of continuity, even in the midst of change. You rise, brushing fine grit from your legs, and begin walking toward a low ridge that once stood above a vast coastal plain. Your path winds between salt bush and ancient emu tracks, fossilized in hardened clay. The sky above begins to pale, not with sunrise, but with reflection. The moon has moved. Time passes quietly here. And just ahead, the land drops away suddenly. You reach the edge and look out. There was ocean here once, then grassland, then ocean again. The sea breathes in centuries. And someone crossed it. You stand at the edge of a vanished world. Below, stretching far toward the horizon, lies a vast expanse of shallow shelf, now submerged beneath the sea, but once dry, flat land, wind-blown, crisscrossed with tracks, scattered with freshwater lagoons and swaying grasses. It is hard to picture now. The surf crashes against a rocky bluff somewhere far off in the dark. But 50,000 years ago, the ocean was over 100 kilometers away. What you now call the Arafura Sea was then open plain. So was the Bass Strait and parts of what's now the Great Barrier Reef. The continent was bigger, wilder. This was Sahul, an Ice Age supercontinent linking modern-day Australia, New Guinea and Tasmania. And someone crossed it. You close your eyes for a moment and listen, not just to the waves, but to the wind. The same wind that once blew across endless grasslands, carrying the scent of saltbush and wild yam daisy. Somewhere out there, in the distant dark, is a memory. And in that memory, a canoe. Because they had to come from somewhere. Evidence suggests that the first human arrival into Sahul occurred between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago. These weren't the first humans on Earth, not by a long shot, but they were the first to cross open water in a journey that required planning, cooperation, and courage. They came across Wallacea, the stepping stone chain of islands between Southeast Asia and Australia. Some of those islands were visible from one another, but others required sea crossings of 60 to 90 kilometers, well beyond the horizon. There were no accidental castaways here, only navigators. And we know this not just from artifacts, but from the land itself. Glacio-eustatic sea level curbs, reconstructed from coral terraces and oxygen isotope data, tell us how much water was locked up in ice sheets at various times. During glacial maxima, sea levels dropped over 120 meters, exposing vast land bridges. By overlaying these reconstructions with bathymetric maps, scientists have recreated the shape of Sahul during the late Pleistocene. These reconstructions show the likely entry points, especially the northern coast near Arnhem Land and the Gulf of Carpentaria. Drift modeling simulations using ocean current reconstructions and wind data have shown that successful crossings were possible, but rare without intent. In randomized drift scenarios, simulated groups rarely reached Sahul, but when departure points, group sizes, and intentional steering were added, success rates increased dramatically. In other words, they meant to come. You step down the ridge and begin walking across what was once dry seafloor. The soil feels different here, silty, shell-rich, and faintly springy. A fossilized mangrove root juts from the bank, half eroded by time. You imagine what it must have looked like. A flotilla of rafts or dugouts, paddling through pre-dawn mist, stars reflected in the inky water, children curled in the center, elders watching the horizon, someone scanning the sky for seabirds, the islands of Wallacea behind them, Sahul ahead. They may not have known the size of the continent they approached, but they knew enough. The smoke of distant fires, the flight paths of migratory birds, the shape of clouds over land. These were navigators, not wanderers. Scholars still debate the exact route and timing. Was it a single wave, or several? Did they land first in New Guinea and gradually move south? Or were there separate landings in the far north and northwest? And what kind of vessels did they use? No rafts have survived, not surprising given the tropical conditions, but experimental archaeology has built plausible craft from natural materials available at the time. Bamboo, bark, pandanus fiber, lashed with vine, sealed with tree resin. Some reconstructions have even attempted crossings using such vessels, with surprising success. You reach a shallow depression where rainwater has pooled. Frogs call from the reeds. For a moment, it's easy to pretend this was still the ancient plain, that you might see a Genyornis stride past, or a group of hunters moving silently along the horizon. But it's gone. The sea returned. Around 12,000 to 8,000 years ago, as the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, Sahul fractured into the continents we know today. Tasmania was cut off. Then New Guinea. The ancient corridors became oceans. The memories became stories. But the knowledge remained. Some indigenous Australian oral traditions reference rising waters, drowned landscapes, and transformed coastlines. Some of these stories, passed down for over 10,000 years, appear to describe real geological events. It's a reminder that memory isn't just carved in stone, it's carried in voices. You sit for a moment beside the pool, watching stars reflect in its surface. Somewhere beneath, shells crunch softly under the weight of your thoughts. It's quiet here, but not empty. You've followed a path from forest to plain, from predator to prey, from thunderbird to canoe. And now it's time to return inland, into the dark, into the rock. Because beneath your feet lies something deeper than footprints. A fossil library, and it's time to open the next page. The land rises gently as you leave the drowned coast behind, moving inland along a dry limestone ridge. The air sharpens. Shrubs give way to stringy barks and she-oaks, and beneath their boughs the ground opens once more, not into ocean, but into shadow. A small cave mouth peers out from a rock face, half concealed by brush. You step inside, and time folds in on itself. Here, beneath the surface, Australia's ancient story is written again. But not in ochre or song. In bone. You've entered the Nara Court Caves, one of the richest Pleistocene fossil deposits in the world. Nestled in the limestone beds of South Australia, these caves have acted as natural pitfall traps for over 500,000 years. Sinkholes, hidden under leaf litter or thin soil crusts, would collapse beneath unsuspecting animals. The injured, or dead, would remain, and so would their bones. The air inside the cave is cool, slightly damp, tinged with calcium and dust. You run your fingers along the wall, tracing the outlines of flowstone, where water has carved slow sculptures over millennia. Beneath your feet, sediments packed with secrets. Evidence suggests that Narakorte's fossil layers preserve a nearly continuous record of vertebrate life in southeastern Australia, covering glacial and interglacial cycles alike. From these deposits, scientists have uncovered the remains of over 130 species, including megafauna like Phylocola, Wonambi, and Diprotodon, as well as countless small mammals, birds, and reptiles. But how do we know when these animals lived? That's where the science shines. In the early years of excavation, dating was rudimentary. Relative stratigraphy, guesses based on faunal turnover. But now, researchers use a suite of modern techniques. Optically stimulated luminescence, OSL, tells us when the cave sediments were last exposed to light. Post-infrared stimulated luminescence, PIRIRSL, improves that precision, especially in older, dimmer samples. Electron spin resonance, ESR, dates tooth enamel by measuring trapped electrons. Uranium series dating, UTHEF, applies to cave formations like flowstone or stalagmites, bracketing fossil ages. And in the deepest layers, uranium-lead, UPB dating offers timelines stretching back even further. By combining these, scientists can build robust age models, not just for individual fossils, but for entire sedimentary sequences. It's like watching time itself being measured in grains and ions. You step carefully deeper, guided by handholds carved into the stone. The passage widens into a low chamber where bones rest in soft clay. Some are exposed, ribs, vertebrae, jaws. Others are still half buried, their curves barely visible beneath a dusting of time. In the far corner, a mandible lies beside a cluster of teeth. Phylocolio again. Its blade-shaped premolar catches the light like a broken dagger. You pause, not because it frightens you, but because it humbles you. This animal lived, walked, killed, and died. And here it remains. Above it, embedded in the same layer, are Diprotodon bones. Their ribs lie cracked but aligned, suggesting a slow burial. Mixed in, wombat bones, bandicoots, possums, even small birds, their delicate skulls surprisingly intact. A community caught in sediment and silence. Scholars still debate the exact tempo of accumulation in different chambers. Some argue that fossils are time-averaged, collected over thousands of years. Others identify discrete events, droughts, collapses, predator dens. But what all agree on is this. Narakorte holds one of the clearest windows into Australia's late Quaternary past. Not a single snapshot, but a slow film reel, one layer at a time. You run your hand along a sediment profile marked with color-coded pegs, red for megafauna extinction horizon, blue for known occupation markers, yellow for luminescence sampled spots. It's like a stratigraphic heartbeat pulsing through mud and dust. Somewhere in the upper layers, radiocarbon ceases to work. Its 50,000-year limit exceeded. Below that, only the luminescence, ESR, and uranium series dates remain to guide us. And they do. They've shown that most megafaunal species vanish from Narakorte's record around 46,000 to 44,000 years ago. Some linger longer, others disappear abruptly. No signs of butchery, no weapons embedded in bone, just absence. Did they starve, lose water, fail to reproduce in the changing climate? Did people, settling nearby, burning landscapes, competing for resources, tip them over the edge. The cave won't say, but its silence is informative. And so, we listen. A drip echoes from deeper within the chamber. Water still moves here, slow as thought. Calcite builds grain by grain. New stalactites stretch downward, inching toward a floor that's already seen thousands of stories end. You sit on a flat stone and breathe. These caves are more than a fossil vault. They're a library of time, each bone a sentence, each layer a page. You think back to Section 1, where quartz grains recorded human arrival. Now, in the dim light of Narakort, those same grains, OSL tagged and gently sampled, anchor animals to their final moments. You think back to Section 4, where you first met Wanambi at the cave mouth. She's here too, coiled in memory. You think of the firelight from Section 11, the grinding stones, the ochre, the people who may have stood here, looking at these same bones, wondering, just like you, what happened to all the giants. Outside, dawn is not yet rising, but the air is shifting. You rise from the cave floor, brush the dust from your hands, and step toward the exit. There's one last story to tell. It begins not in fossils, but in disappearances. You emerge from the cave into a cooler breeze. The sky has paled ever so slightly, not yet with sunrise, but with the dim grey of the deepest pre-dawn. The land around you is still cloaked in shadow, but in your mind a clearer picture begins to form. You've walked among giants, touched their bones, imagined their gait and gaze and breath. But now you must face a quieter moment. Not when they lived, when they didn't. Because across this continent, between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, something changed. The megafauna disappeared, and no single cause can explain it. You sit now beside a scatter of ancient tools, a few flakes of quartz, a sharpened point, the weathered edge of a digging stick. Not a battlefield, not a hunting scene, just the ordinary imprint of human presence. Nearby, the broken jawbone of a young diprotodon rests half buried in the clay. No cut marks, no burns, just absence. This is the extinction moment. But it's not loud, not sudden. It's more like an unravelling. Evidence suggests that nearly 85% of Australia's large-bodied fauna, those over 45 kg, vanished in a relatively narrow window of time after human arrival. That includes Diprotodon, the largest marsupial ever; Procoptodon, the striding giant kangaroo; Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion; Wanambi, the constricting snake; Genyornis, the thunderbird; and many more: Zygomaturus, Sthenurus, Palorchestes, Paludirex. The fossil record shows overlapping timelines. Human artifacts and megafaunal remains occur together, especially at open-air sites in the north and southeast. Bayesian modelling of last appearance dates, which uses multiple radiocarbon and luminescent samples, helps reconstruct the fade-out of species across regions. But there's no single extinction day, no universal event. Scholars still debate what drove this wave of loss. One model suggests direct overhunting. As humans spread, their need for food led to rapid declines in vulnerable species. But this blitzkrieg hypothesis, once popular, now seems overly simplistic, especially given the lack of direct kill sites or mass butchery. Another model emphasizes climate stress. Around 45,000 years ago, Australia entered a phase of deepening aridity. Lakes shrank, grasslands contracted, fire frequency rose. This would have fragmented habitats, reduced food supply, and challenged large animals with high water and energy needs. But humans were part of that environment now, too. And their impact may have been less about spears, and more about fire. Increased charcoal concentrations in sediment cores across the continent show a spike in burning activity after human arrival. Some of this may reflect cultural burning, deliberate controlled fires for managing vegetation, attracting prey, or clearing travel routes. But the ecological effects were real. Fire-adapted species like kangaroo grasses and spinifex expanded. Shrublands retreated. Trees like casuarina declined. For generalist herbivores, this wasn't a crisis. But for specialists like Palorchestes or Diprotodon, the changes may have been insurmountable. Still, not every region changed the same way. You pull out a worn map from your pack, a kind of mental overlay, and trace the regions of loss. In the southwest, pollen records show a transition from dense forest to open heathlands. Megafaunal extinction there coincides closely with this shift. In the interior, dune fields expanded, and waterholes became more ephemeral. Fossil-rich caves like tight entrance preserve Thylacoleo up until... In the east, wetter refugia may have lasted longer, but even there the giants vanish from deposits by 40,000 pounds years ago. In all cases, the pattern is the same. They're present, then they're gone, and humans remain. You brush your hand along a layer of burnt eggshell fragments, the same type you saw near the fire in Section 7. Their thermal signature matches slow cooking. The amino acid profiles suggest repeated heating. They're not isolated accidents. This is habit. And habits leave traces. Proteomics, amino acid racemization. Paleodietary isotopes, multiproxy climate models, and more all point to a mosaic of pressures. Some natural, some human-made. The debate isn't whether humans played a role. The debate is how much. Were they the final push, the steady pressure, or merely present when larger systems began to falter? In some Aboriginal oral traditions, there are echoes, stories of great creatures, vanished beings, and transformations of the land. These stories don't name extinction in our sense, but they carry memory. Memory of change, memory of loss. You sit now at the center of all those threads, scientific and cultural, fossil and fire, predator and prey. The air is still. Even the wind seems to have paused. Somewhere far off, a curlew calls. You think back through everything you've seen. The towering shadow of Megalania, the flash of Quincana's teeth, the slow thunder of Diprotodon, the slicing bite of Thylacoleo, the steady gaze of Genyornis, the patience of Palodyrex, the strange stride of Procoptodon, the clawed limbs of Palorchestes, and the careful firelight of our own ancestors. They all shared this land, and now most are gone. But their story isn't. You rise slowly and begin walking again. The sky is shifting now, still dark but softening. The stars have begun to fade. There is one more place to visit. Not a fossil bed, not a trackway, a memory held in silence, and perhaps in voice. You walk now through low hills dusted with spinifex, where the rocks are warm even before the sun arrives, and every shadow is long and watchful. There are no bones here, no towering skulls or claws fossilized in red earth. But something deeper lingers, something not preserved in stone, but in story. You crest a rise, and the landscape opens wide, dry riverbeds etched like veins across the earth, outcrops carved by wind into overhangs and shelters, scattered ghost gums, pale and silent. And within the folds of this ancient land there is memory, not written, not buried, spoken. This is country, and in country everything has a story, even silence. Across Australia, Aboriginal peoples have lived with, cared for and interpreted this land for tens of thousands of years. Their knowledge systems are not fossil records. They are oral traditions, passed down with precision, generation after generation. Stories sung, danced, etched into stone, and carried across plains and time. Evidence suggests that some of these stories may preserve real geological and ecological events, passed down intact for over 10,000 years. Accounts of rising seas, disappearing islands, changing rivers, and vanished beings. These are not myths in the dismissive sense. They are mnemonic systems. They are maps. They are warnings. One such tradition speaks of creatures that once shaped the rivers and mountains, serpents with thunder in their breath. In another, there are tales of enormous birds, strange kangaroos that walked like men, animals that no longer walk the earth. Sometimes these stories speak of fire, or famine, or the long stillness that followed a change. Could some of these echo the megafaunal extinctions? Could they be cultural memory of events like sea level rise, droughts, or ecosystem collapse? Scholars still debate this. Some researchers argue that while oral traditions can be incredibly durable, matching specific stories to specific events is fraught with uncertainty. Oral systems evolve, like languages, like landscapes. Others, however, have found remarkable consistencies between Aboriginal accounts and independently dated environmental events. In some coastal regions, for example, stories describe islands that were once hills, now surrounded by sea. Geological data confirms that those land bridges vanished around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. The match is not vague, it is precise. In elevation, in timing, in location. It suggests something profound. That people remembered, and they still do. You sit now beneath an overhang, where ancient rock art decorates the ceiling in faded ochre and charcoal. A handprint, a circle of lines, a bird with a thick beak. These are not illustrations. They are not decorations. They are conversations with land, with time, with ancestors. Modern science approaches the past with tools. Carbon isotopes, OSL, speleothem chemistry, Bayesian modeling. But these stories carry their own calibration. They measure in generations. And in listening. The best researchers today do not seek to extract knowledge from indigenous communities. They collaborate, respecting protocols, listening deeply, co-authoring research, sharing decision-making power. It's a slow process. And it should be. Because this isn't just about data, it's about relationship. You rise and walk further, feeling the land shift beneath your feet, not physically, but in meaning. The hills are no longer background. They are players in the story. The trees are not silent. They are names. The wind is not random. It carries memory. And it asks you to slow down, to listen, to stop seeing the past as something buried, and instead, as something lived. Yes, the megafauna are gone. Their bones lie silent. But people remain, and so do the stories. Stories that remember animals like the Gignornis, not by Latin name, but by character, that recall rising waters, not as sea levels in meters, but as ancestral movement, that understand time not as a straight line, but as a weaving between past, present, and future. You crouch again, hand resting on sun-warmed stone. Here we tread lightly, not because the ground is fragile, but because it is known for 65,000 years or more, known in ways that science is only beginning to understand. You exhale slowly. The wind moves through the spinifex again. Some stories are told. Some are kept. Both deserve respect. Now, with one last journey ahead, you rise gently, back toward the center, back toward reflection, back toward dawn. The land glows before the light arrives. Soft greys turn to blue, and blue to the faintest rose. A breath of cool air slides across your skin, lifting the scent of dust, ash, and dry grass. You've returned to a place between places. A quiet basin ringed by trees, their silhouettes sharp against the eastern sky. This is nowhere in particular, and that's why it's perfect. Because here, in this nameless space, everything you've seen can gather. You sit on a flat stone, the surface still holding the memory of night. Around you the land is quiet. Not empty, but calm. A waterhole lies nearby. Shallow. Still. The wind leaves its surface untouched, just a perfect mirror. And in that mirror, the past returns. You see the broad shape of a diprotodon, cresting the saltbush plain like a moving boulder. The shimmer of a procoptodon, upright and strange, striding across the light. Again yawness, feathers ruffling in the wind. A coiled wanambi at the cave edge. A distant thylacolor, eyes shining, blade teeth tucked behind its lips. You see humans, too. Hands grinding seeds, fingers dipped in ochre, fires flickering between stories, each one rooted in place, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as listeners, embedded in a land where everything speaks. And now, so do we, because this has been more than a journey through prehistoric Australia. It's been a journey through time, measured not in years, but in moments. Moments when predators watched from shadow, when drought cracked open lake beds, when fire revealed eggshells beneath the ash, when a canoe slipped across dawn water toward a continent still wild with mystery. Evidence suggests these stories are real, that the fossils, the sediments, the protein fragments, the pollen grains, they all speak truth. Not a single truth, but a layered one. How do we know? Because the tools of science, OSL, radiocarbon, ESR, U-series, finite element analysis, paleoproteomics, allow us to read time like a scroll, slowly unrolling its edges. Because the caves remember. Because the land, when listened to carefully, tells you everything. And because even now, even in a world of satellites and concrete, some voices still carry 10,000 years. We've walked from predator to prey, from land to sea, from extinction to story, from silence to listening. And now, the sun lifts its edge over the horizon, golden, quiet, certain. A new day. But before we go, let's take a final breath together. A slow one. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold. And exhale for 7. Again. In. Hold. Out. Let your breath slow, Let the ground beneath you hold your weight. Let your mind ease. You don't need to remember every date or name or species. Just this: that time is vast, that stories are strong, and that there is beauty, even in endings, especially in endings. Sleep well, traveler of ancient lands.